He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025, the 94th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Welcome to the Wednesday subscriber stream. We're doing the evening edition. And I hope you guys have all had a good day. And I see no questions or comments on the Substack comments. So we're just going to go through things, and I'll try to pay some additional attention to the chat today. I barely paid attention on Monday. But I hope you're all doing well, and let's get into it. We talked on Monday about the effort that's been ongoing for years now to turn Trump into Hitler and his supporters into Nazis, so that eventually all of the problematic people who are rejecting the regime's system and agenda and the Uniparty in the United States, the establishment broadly, the military-industrial complex, the corporate world, the political parties, all of the old guard, eventually this effort is intended to make it so that people will, and by people I mean the American public, will accept this group of people is so bad that they can be treated in whatever way necessary in order to either get them to stop doing what they're doing, or perhaps we'll have to imprison them, put them in a psychiatric hospital, or kill them. And this is the sort of thing that we've seen from the global regime over and over throughout history. You can look back at the history of the 20th century and viewed through the proper lens, once adjusted for the obvious brainwashing and indoctrination, the revisions of history that make up our education. You can see the same patterns emerging, and we talked about that at some length on Monday. And then yesterday, I saw this from Politico, and this will just lead us into a larger discussion on what exactly this effort is. Al Gore compares Trump administration to Nazi Germany. There's Al. It's looking kind of orange. Well tanned and well fed Al Gore. Glad to see he's doing so well. He's really profited off the climate grift. Former Vice President Al Gore on Monday compared President Donald Trump's administration to Nazi Germany and issued a dire warning about Trump's use of power in a speech devoted to climate change. Speaking at an event at the start of San Francisco's Climate Week, Gore said the Trump administration was, quote, trying to create their own preferred version of reality, end quote, to achieve their sweeping objectives similar to Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party in the 1930s and 1940s. And so when somebody's remarking that Donald Trump is attempting to create a false reality, you know I'm going to have to talk about it. There has been a false reality created. It's the one that we believe is our normal American life, whereupon further examination of any given aspect of this American life, you can dig into it, try to consider it deeply in all its aspects, what the words actually mean, what the concepts are supposed to actually represent, and you'll find that they've all been inverted. And those inversions presented as the things that they inverted, the opposite is presented as the genuine article. Those together, combined, lead us to experiencing life perceived through the lens of that false reality. And so what I've argued now for years is that Donald Trump, the awakening that he's been a catalyst of, these things have broken down that false reality that was created through fake news, false histories, indoctrination, social incentives, financial incentives, a whole range of kind of instruments by which they are able to create and construct this false reality. But it has been created, and it is now collapsing. It is now falling away. And so on that side, of course, the natural thing to do is suggest that the baseline reality, the reality prime layer, and this is actually the reality prime t-shirt. You can't see the design, but it's on the back. You can go to cancelcouture.com and find it. But that reality prime layer, that's the false reality. If you strip away all of their stories, everything they've used to construct their false reality, well, you're left with reality prime, but to them, that's the inversion. And so we are just on polar opposites at this point, hence the division. And I always, I know that this is not generally what they're talking about when they talk about the poles reversing, the poles of the earth reversing, and the earth having poles is another separate discussion. But in some sense, I mean, I remember I used to make fun of people in the lead up to 2012 when it was like, this is the end of the Mayan calendar and the poles of the earth are going to reverse and this is the apocalypse and the awakening is coming and blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, this sounds like nonsense. And now I look back at it and I think, okay, something definitely flipped at some point. And what we're in now is the process of recognition of that flip. And there are people who were kind of always of the understanding that all of this layered reality is bullshit. But for many of us, that realization has just occurred within the last decade or so. And so it kind of makes me wonder if maybe that idea, if not the details of it, if there's really a lot more to it, because, man, to go back to reality prime, to go back to the proper definitions of words and the proper understandings of concepts, all rooted in the realization that these are layers of fakery, but underneath all of that is the truth of God. And then we have to really center and focus on that part and then work our way back from there. To think that that is the reality inversion is utterly insane as far as I'm concerned. But let's continue. I understand very well why it is wrong to compare Adolf Hitler's Third Reich to any other movement, Gore said to an audience of roughly 150 climate advocates and policymakers gathered at a science museum on San Francisco's waterfront. It was uniquely evil, full stop. I get it. But there are important lessons from the history of that emergent evil. So he understands that it's wrong to compare things to Adolf Hitler's Third Reich, but he's going to do it anyway. Gore's remarks follow sharp attacks on the Trump administration by a throng of party luminaries and former leaders in recent weeks. And they go into Barack Obama and Kamala and Hillary Clinton. Gore, for his part, cited German philosophers' moral autopsy on the Third Reich in the aftermath of World War II. It was Jürgen Habermas's mentor, Theodor Adorno, who wrote that the first step in that nation's descent into hell was, and I quote, the conversion of all questions of truth into questions of power, Gore said. He described how the Nazis, and I quote again, attacked the very heart of the distinction between true and false, end quote. The Trump administration is insisting on trying to create their own preferred version of reality. So that's what it is. They converted all questions of truth into questions of power. And we are to believe that it's the MAGA movement doing that because Donald Trump has exercised elements of the power vested in the plenary executive authority of the executive branch of our government. The commander-in-chief is acting as commander-in-chief. The president is acting as president rather than the facilitator of the administrative deep state, a puppet, a Manchurian candidate, a face of that system that doesn't actually have any real power and isn't actually elected by the people. How could he do this? Questions of truth become questions of power. Well, where has all the financial power been? In the hands of the regime. Where has all the reputational power been? In the hands of the regime. Of course, they own all media. They control the social aspects of our existence. They create the false reality, not only through media, but through even things, and I mean media as in specifically the news media, but our popular entertainment, sports, cinema, social media, television commercials indoctrinate us into an understanding of what our reality is. And so all the social incentives are under their control. The resources, the trade routes under their control. The military under their control. Always under the regime's control. So where is the power from which we've been speaking? And the answer is it's nowhere. If there is any power, it lies only in the truth. We are not the ones who are replacing questions of truth with questions of power, then wielding power so that whatever we say goes. It's the exact opposite. You cannot create that false reality without all of that control. And Donald Trump, to the extent that he is a catalyst for the collapse of that false reality, is doing so only by eliciting the truth. And it's not even always through him telling truths. It's through him sparking conversations that end up unearthing truth or bringing out hidden truths or making people confident enough to state truth as they understand it, as they've always understood it. And you ask me, I think that's one of the most brilliant effects of the Trump era. Skipping down. They say the climate crisis is a hoax invented by the Chinese to destroy American manufacturing. They say coal is clean. They say wind turbines cause cancer. They say sea level rise just creates more beachfront property. I've never heard the clean coal thing, sure. I've never heard the thing about the beachfront property. Wind turbines cause cancer? Well, I haven't heard that claim. I don't know if that's true or not. It might be true. But they definitely aren't things that the people in coastal communities want. And even the most liberal people are becoming radicalized and becoming more conservative based on wind turbines offshore. We know that wind turbines onshore end up with bird graveyards beneath them. The blades eventually break or wear down and have to be replaced and then are put in landfills. They're never going to ever go away. So Al Gore's kind of getting crazy here. As for clean coal, make of that what you will. But the idea that these are elements of a false reality, when you're pitching climate change and you said that we were all going to be underwater by now, kind of insane. Gore also invoked Martin Luther King Jr. and the late Pope Francis in his 25-minute speech, which was largely devoted to exhorting the crowd to continue pursuing action on climate change. We've already seen, by the way, how populist authoritarian leaders have used migrants as scapegoats and have fanned the fires of xenophobia to fuel their own rise of power. And power seeking is what this is all about. Our Constitution, written by our founders, is intended to protect us against a threat identical to Donald Trump. And that is preposterous. That right there is some serious false reality thinking. The Constitution was set up to disperse power among co-equal branches. The president has the power assigned to him, delegated to him by first the people and then the states. The people delegate their power to the states and then to the federal government. And the president has such powers as delegated in the Constitution. And he has not violated the powers as described in the Constitution. Of course, to Al Gore, the Constitution is actually the inversion of the Constitution of the founders. And we've talked too many times to count about the Reconstruction Amendments, George P. Fletcher's book, Our Secret Constitution, how the Constitution was inverted during that period. He argues throughout the entire book that all of this was a good thing. It was necessary to invert the Constitution. Hence the title, Our Secret Constitution. Other books have been written about the Second Constitution. The Second Constitution is the Reconstruction Amendments and the inversion caused by them. He also believes that norms are the Constitution, rules are the Constitution, statutes, regulations, court precedent, all part of the Constitution. Unratified amendments, of course, those are part of the Constitution. All of that is the Constitution Al Gore is referring to. Of course, none of that is actually the founders' Constitution, which Donald Trump abides and which Al Gore does not. And the people around him do not, because that original Constitution became too inconvenient to propel the regime forward. And the regime has backed Chinese communism, Nazi Germany, Bolshevism in Russia, and you can just go on and on. Neoconservatism in the United States, neoliberalism in the United States. Collectivism is their game. It's odd when they compare these prior regimes of the 20th century with Donald Trump. Makes no sense at all. And maybe I'll just pull this up just as a reminder here, hold for processing. I made this graphic in 2022, maybe. Things Nazis did, things communists did, things the regime is doing, supporting, planning, they're the same list. Everything that Al Gore and his friends have supported is directly in line with things that the Nazi and communist regimes of the 20th century did. Or, to the extent that the things they're accused of having done were things that they have done. It really is crazy. But the effort is not stopping. Now, I think I might have only come across this because of being on the Substack app, although it's kind of made it into the Twitter sphere, and there's a crossover with the New York Times at some point. But anyhow, I'm going to pull up the Substack of a man named Pedro Gonzalez, who was a Ron DeSantis sim. He was originally a Bernie bro, and then he was a Ron DeSantis sim, and now he writes articles about how Substack and Blue Sky are less toxic than Twitter is, or X, formerly Twitter. So, take that for what it's worth. The guy was a leftist, a collectivist, a supporter of Bernie Sanders' democratic socialism. And then he was a supporter of Ron DeSantis because he had, I guess, come around to conservatism online or something. And neoconservatism is the same regime. So when you find neoconservatives as an alternative to Donald Trump, but presented as an alternative to socialism, leftism, the Democrat Party, etc., you think, oh, well, these are my people. Nonetheless, you're still a collectivist. You're still a leftist. The philosophy is downstream from Trotsky. And Burning Bright and I talked about this briefly last night. But you can see the Trotsky in the neoconservatism. Trotsky wanted revolution at all times, worldwide, throughout the world. Always revolution. And the neoconservatives want the same thing in a militant way, which is why they have talked about for decades spreading democracy around the globe. That's not spreading Americanism around the world or becoming the example that the rest of the world wants to follow. That's using the United States military to impose regime collectivism all around the globe. So why would it be surprising when former liberals, and myself, I'm a former liberal, so why would it be surprising when they end up going to neoconservatism and thinking, oh, we've changed, we found the right thing? And of course, that's where he landed. He's got this other co-author in this little piece. I guess they did a podcast together. So she's tagged in here, but it's his writing. This woman, Alex Kashuda, I looked on her page earlier. The first post that she has is a repost of a Rene DiResta article. Rene DiResta was one of the people involved in the censorship industrial complex. And Mike Benz has done extensive work on Rene DiResta. So I say that to let you know what kind of people we're dealing with here. But their topic of conversation and the topic of this Substack, I did not listen to the conversation. I cannot spend my time doing that sort of thing. The topic, though, is it goes by various names depending on how they're referring to it. The dissident right, the new right, the far right, or the online right. And right now there's this big movement to let conservatives know, supposedly, that's ostensibly for this reason, to let them know that actually they're all getting hoodwinked by the far right and online right, and they need to get out now while the getting is good. So I just want to read a few paragraphs of this. He says, all I want to do is warn people away from it because I cannot think of a better word than evil to describe it. Maybe demonic would be more appropriate. Now, that's not to say, I think he means, there are no conservatives or right-wing writers, activists, or organizations that aren't decent or trying to accomplish something good while staying above the stupidity. I know many who I consider friends. But the dissident right or new right or far right or online right or whatever adjective you want to use is fundamentally a poison pill that will cause the eventual moral and spiritual death of anyone who ingests it. These people do not care who you voted for in November. Indeed, if you voted for Donald Trump, they just see that as license to gloat about your suffering because in their minds, you gave them power over you and you should have known better. Now he's talking about people in the Trump movement being happy that the markets crashed. There is a post I saw today, repost, and maybe it's not in here. Oh, there it is. Yes, it is. This raw egg nationalist post is one of the examples he gave. He's posting an anon on some board. Okay. Maybe that's the Donald.win or Patriots.win or whatever it's called. Maybe that's 4chan. I don't know. Okay. I don't spend time on the boards. Regardless, the post says the market is crashing and the response is good. Boomers can't retire. The response is good. You'll never buy a house. Never had a chance. You'll lose your job. Never had one. You will pay more. Never paid for anything anyways. I voted for this and you lost. Now, those views don't represent my views, okay? But it's also not worth absolutely freaking out about. The market crashing is an expected result. The crash was primarily those 7 tech stocks, the Magnificent Seven, that drive the kind of top line of the overall market. All of this adjustment was going to occur. The adjustment is occurring because the regime's system of actual evil is being stepped away from. We believe that adjustment is necessary in order to get to a system that isn't that one. And as far as you'll never buy a house goes, that's true for a lot of Americans. And like, to tell them when the economy is going through these adjustments and people are freaking out, the media is freaking out, and they see a segment of people being like, no, wait, this is good. That drives them crazy. But let's continue below. Many or most of them do not have real jobs and are often insulated from policy outcomes that would hurt you. That pundit who is indifferent to or even celebrates the liquidation of your wealth and immiseration of your children, there's a good chance that his political project stems from the resentment that he lives with his mother, or that he secretly hates his wife, that his wife is the real breadwinner in the household, or that his lack of basic social skills set him back in life. That's also why his politics are defined entirely by an endless number of enemies, whether it's the Jews or women or working class Americans who just don't see the grandiosity of his delusions. And he goes on and on and on. Okay, so it's extremists who don't have jobs. They're the problem. And this is the dissident right, the new right, the far right, etc. Pablo, as I've always called him, is Trump deranged. He was unbelievably Trump deranged throughout the Ron DeSantis op. He was one of the most malicious Trump and MAGA haters throughout the DeSantis op. And now Trump has won. Trump is back in power. And Pablo has retreated to the safer climate of Substack and Blue Sky because he wants to have a highbrow intellectual conversation with his fellow elites, which are really wannabe elites, but they believe that they are elites. What they are is useful idiots. They are serving the agenda of the elites, believing that they are going to be pulled up multiple rungs on the kind of ladder of hierarchy within the party of false decorum, but that's never going to happen. Pablo is the kind of guy who tries to brand himself as an appreciator of the finer things in life. It's just a real down-to-earth guy who has these views. He knows what's right, except he has never been right. He was wrong about everything throughout the Ron DeSantis op. Everything I've ever read from him, and there's a great many, it's mostly Twitter posts, but a few of these posts. The man is permanently wrong as a result of his Trump derangement, just as virtually every wannabe elite has been throughout the last 10 years. When I was wrong about politics and thinking that Trump was, and everybody's wrong about politics still, including myself, okay? I understand that. But I believed what the television said about Trump, and I thought that Trump was stupid and a narcissist and mean and evil and blah, blah, blah. These people still believe it, and they can't let go of that because of the things they've said and done, and because they're not willing to admit that they're wrong about all these things. And so what they have to do now is begin to marginalize Trump supporters. And it doesn't have to be all of them. And I doubt that they're talking about people like me, to be honest. There are people online that actually do seem ill-intentioned. And I'm not trying to make excuses for those people. I'm just trying to talk about what I see as the big picture arc of what's happening right now. They will marginalize the worst out of the worst characters. And we saw this, by the way. We've seen it before. We saw it in the first Trump term, and we saw it even with the online censorship. We saw it with the efforts to shut down 4chan and 8chan and 8kun. They would suggest there are these terrible extremists on that site spreading these ideas. And some of those extremists spreading those ideas from anonymous accounts happen to be intelligence assets of the global regime. If you're not familiar with what Fed posting is, by all means, look it up. When we had the review of a lot of those posts last week in that 4chan hack, now, some of that's a hazy information zone, okay? But there was strong indication that a lot of that stuff was actually coming from Israeli intelligence. And regardless, those extremists are used as the examples of what's going to happen when you talk about, in this example, the Jews at all, okay? You can't have any of the discussions those people have, because if you do, it's going to open up space for more people to have those discussions. And at the end of that slippery slope is those extremists, and you don't want to be one of those. And once they've properly marginalized those people, they then get to marginalize all those ideas. And then they get to marginalize the people who are a layer less extreme, a layer less extreme, a layer less extreme, until you're just talking about a big chunk of the mainstream conversation that can no longer be had, because any conversation about certain topics is deemed to be equivalent to that same extremism. So what they need to do is define the extremism and what it means and what it's for, so that they can get the refined version of what that is and then start applying it to other people on a much broader basis. And at the end of that, well, then you really have a choice. Are you going to continue talking about those subjects, or are you going to silence yourself and align once again with the establishment in the center, as they like to pretend they are? Now, that sounds a whole lot like what they did on the left, except now it's the right doing it, because they're just, doing some housekeeping. They don't want their fellow people on the right to fall into these kinds of patterns and problems. They don't want them to be influenced by these extremists. What we have to do is understand that these conversations are extreme. So Jordan Peterson went on Joe Rogan again yesterday, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because, honestly, with 11 million people or 13 million people, whatever it is, watching that show, you would think that at some point he would stop having all of these regime intelligence assets on as guests. And that really is the roster of his guests, and then his comedian friends. But Jordan Peterson, intellectual dark web, people got familiar with him. He became very famous for challenging gender ideology in Canada and for going on a newscast with a British newscaster woman who he totally slammed. And now he's part of the Daily Weimar with Ben Shapiro. Jordan Peterson, when Barry Weiss, on behalf of the New York Times, let us know who our new intellectual renegades were, the intellectual dark web. She gave us Brett and Eric Weinstein and Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan and Dave Rubin and Michael Shermer and Christina Hoff Sommers. And I'm going to forget a few of the names. But the regime, through Barry Weiss, who's now the person at the Free Press outlet, which is sponsored by tech leftist Mark Andreessen, tech libertarian. Barry Weiss is as Zionist as they come. Her site was writing about all of the babies in ovens and everything after the paragliding go-kart incident. Just fully regime mouthpiece. Was it the New York Times? She left during that blow up in the editorial room after Tom Cotton's op-ed on the Insurrection Act was published, after the whole thing about the park outside the White House, blah, blah, blah. We don't have to get into that. But she let us know who our new intellectual renegades were. And all of these people, of course, Sam Harris, I can't believe I forgot him, were on the podcast circuit. They would go on each other's shows. And the home base for all of it, the ultimate big stage, was the Joe Rogan podcast. And it remains that way to this day. And all of these people still go. I'm not sure Sam Harris goes so much anymore, because Sam Harris has lost his mind countless times. But most particularly because he was mad that Brett Weinstein didn't get fully on board with the COVID agenda. You had to be fully on board. But all these people got on board with the COVID agenda. Rogan, I guess, less so. But the rest of them fully on board. Ukraine, fully on board. Israel, fully on board. The whole thing. Every agenda item that the regime proposes, that the Uniparty proposes, these people back it. And they still do. And of course, Jordan Peterson is now, as I said, at the Daily Weimar, which means he has to express certain views on certain topics. And they may well be his views for all I know. I mean, he might just be ideologically aligned with Ben Shapiro and various other neocons. Jordan Peterson also realized that they needed, that the World Economic Forum, they represented the sort of bad collectivism. And so what we needed was a new World Economic Forum. And he actually started one called ARC. And people like Douglas Murray attended and spoke at ARC. Eric Weinstein, whatever, gave a talk at ARC. One of the dumbest talks I've ever watched in my life. There have been times where I'm not trying to say the guy never says intelligent things. He does say some interesting things. And he does have some interesting observations. But beneath all that, Eric Weinstein suffers a total inversion within the false reality. And he thinks he is a spectacular genius. He's also a Talmudic secular Jew and atheist. So, and obviously scientific materialist. So, you know, the background, of course, comes into play. So Jordan Peterson is supposed to be the savior on the right. He's the guy that we're all supposed to look up to as the key intellectual. He actually wrote a book about Christianity from his non-Christian perspective, and it has been widely panned, as you might imagine. But of course, he thinks it's the most brilliant thing ever. So Jordan Peterson was a big proponent of the vaccine and the rest of the COVID program. And he's also a big proponent of ending the ability for people to be anonymous online. He believes that everyone should have their face and their name behind everything they say, so that, I guess, potentially society can hold them accountable, their family, friends, and neighbors can hold them accountable, and their workplaces can hold them accountable. And he thinks that's how everything should be in order to say things online. Now, the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers were written by people hiding their identities, writing under pen names. A lot of the awakening process over these last few years has been led by people with anonymous accounts, where no one knows the person behind the account. Jordan Peterson thinks all of that is unacceptable. because people say mean things online and spread ideas online that he thinks are dangerous. That's the same argument that we had made for the first round of censorship. Now, of course, a new round of censorship is needed because people are saying the no-no words about the no-no topics that no one was ever supposed to get to. And in the back of your mind, remember this entire time, the end game, the ultimate kind of, not Trump, but Trump card, is that the same playbook is run as was run at the end of World War II. And we are seeing the early stages of that, I think. Here is Jordan Peterson yesterday.
I think that...
And by the way, Jordan Peterson is just such a preposterous dandy. To think that this man is not a narcissist is mind-blowing. But let us go ahead and take a listen to what he has to say.
I think that virtualization has enabled the psychopaths.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, well,
without a doubt.
That's a terrible thing because the psychopathic types, they're always the death of everything. Like I'm seeing this come up on the right now. So imagine this. I've been working on a new theory of political psychopathology, and I like it quite a lot.
Is this where the term the woke right comes in?
Yeah, well, Lindsay is pointing at that, but he hasn't got the diagnosis exactly right. So it isn't woke. That's not the issue. It's not exactly.
I think
one
what
level.
they're talking about is like similar types of behavior.
He is talking about that. Yeah, no. What he's pointing.
Woke just lets you clarify in your head. Oh, it's like that.
Yeah, but the problem is
it's like Antifa.
Yeah, absolutely. But the problem is that argument is predicated on the claim that the ideas are the problem, like the woke ideas, for example, on the right or the left. But that's not the problem. The problem is that 4 to 5% of the population, something like that, is cluster B, that's the DSM-5 terms, histrionic, narcissistic, antisocial, psychopathic, or they have dark tetrad traits. They're Machiavellian, they're sadistic. That's about 4%. Okay, so the question is, how do these people maneuver? And the answer is they go to where the power is and they adopt those ideas and they put themselves even on the forefront of that. Right. But the ideas are completely irrelevant.
Right.
All they're doing is they're the Pharisees. They're the modern version of the Pharisees. They're the people who use God's name in vain, right? As they proclaim moral virtue.
Yes.
Doesn't matter whether it's right or left or Christian or Jewish or Islam. They invade the idea space and then they use those ideas as false weapons to advance their narcissistic advantage.
Yes.
And so then you have the problem. And the right's going to face this more and more, particularly because the left had to face it when they were in powers.
Yes.
How do you identify the psychopathic parasites, 4% of the population, who are clothed in your clothing and waving your flags, but who are only in it for narcissistic benefit?
Yeah, Jordan, that's you, man. It really is incredible. And the thing about the Pharisees, of course, he wants to let you know that Christian nationalism, quote unquote, and I get that there are fringe people and extremists in every group, okay? Blah, blah, blah. But the problem is then they take those extremists and make them representative of the group. And that's, of course, the goal with the marginalization. The man who wrote a book called We Wrestle with God, We Who Wrestle with God, that just came out last year. And actually, you know what? I'll just read the description from this. In We Who Wrestle with God, Jordan Peterson guides us through the ancient foundational stories of the Western world. In riveting detail, he analyzes the biblical accounts of rebellion, sacrifice, suffering, and triumph that stabilize, inspire, and unite us culturally and psychologically. Adam and Eve and the eternal fall of mankind, the resentful and ultimately murderous war of Cain and Abel, the cataclysmic flood of Noah, the spectacular collapse of the Tower of Babel, Abraham's terrible adventure, and the epic of Moses and the Israelites. What could such stories possibly mean? What force wrote and assembled them over the long centuries? How did they bring our spirits and the world together and point us in the same direction? It is time for us to understand such things scientifically and spiritually, to become conscious of the structure of our souls and our societies, and to see ourselves and others as if for the first time. That guy is calling other people Pharisees. And you got to remember, background of all of this, he's protecting certain groups that, of course, have nothing to do with the Pharisees. It is amazing. So, the psychopathology. Now, I read a book 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, by an investigative journalist named John Ronson. It's called The Psychopath Test. John Ronson is actually the guy who wrote the book Men Who Stare at Goats. And then that was turned into a Hollywood film. And that's about the intelligence agencies and defense departments' efforts toward recognizing kind of supernatural powers or paranormal powers, or however you might want to refer to them, in people so that they could be used by soldiers, and you could be remote viewing or making physical objects disappear and the like. Okay? Very interesting book. John Ronson's a splendid writer, and he's actually really funny. In addition, he wrote another great book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed that came out, 10 years ago, and was all about shame culture and internet mob bullying and the like. Very, very interesting book. He's a very interesting writer. I don't know if I read him now, if I would agree with his political stances. I have no idea. I don't care. Okay. So the psychopath test was incredibly interesting. And one of the key insights of that book was understanding, and he kind of says that psychopaths and sociopaths are equivalent in that they have some malfunction with their amygdala, which makes it impossible for them to experience empathy. They have no ability to understand what another person might be feeling. And they, like one of the examples was they showed a serial killer pictures of people who were sad or in pain or whatever, and the serial killer was not able to understand what emotion they were experiencing based on the picture. And if I'm not mistaken, his response was, "Oh, that's the way they looked right before I killed them." So in the book, he describes the number of these people in the population overall being about 1%. Jordan Peterson just described it as 4%. Maybe he was using a group that included more kinds of people, but Ronson described it at 1%. He said that it went up to 4% in metropolitan areas or in systems of power like in corporate America, because people with those personality traits demand stimulation all the time. And so they'll go to places where stimulation is more present because it gives them things to do. It gives them situations to manipulate and turn to their benefit. It gives them more people to manipulate. It gives them all kinds of abstract power when you get in a corporate structure or when you're playing social popularity games within the party of false decorum. And I was in one of those societies, and I knew 5,000 people, which means I probably knew, 4%, 40 per 1,000. So 200 psychopaths. That wouldn't surprise me at all if that was true. Okay. So they gravitate to attention. They gravitate to power. All of that makes sense. But he's essentially saying that these people saying mean things online are doing it so that they can acquire power, and they're doing it as psychopaths who have no empathy for the people they're talking about. Now, that may be true in some cases. I have no idea. I don't know the full roster of people that have upset Jordan Peterson and upset Pablo Gonzalez and upset James Lindsay, who we'll talk about in a second. There may be people like that. But the idea that the people in the Trump MAGA base who don't care about respecting the authority of their cultural betters, the idea that they're all psychopaths is nuts. And we're talking about, and, Jordan Peterson is whatever he is. And I'm not trying to come after him as a person, except to the extent of what he's actually doing now. But we're not talking about a totally stable character mentally here. He had a total breakdown and collapse like 4 years ago, and then came back with the Daily Weimar, a different person, starting all of these important projects like ARC and the rest of it. He's become a ridiculous fool. He dresses like the Joker. I want to actually pull a picture of this up. I wonder if somebody's actually made like a list of Jordan Peterson's ridiculous outfits. Because some of them are just so awful. I want to find his Joker suit. Oh, good Lord. The things I'm looking at and not pulling up yet. Here we go. This will work perfect. This will make my point without having to go too far into it. Jordan Peterson reveals reason for his highly memed designer hell suits. Newsweek. So apparently he's got a reason behind it. But here he is dressed apparently as the Joker in a multicolored suit. And I don't know if that's fire and ice. What a whack job. Here he is looking like a old lady. What is that? What is that? What is he doing? I cannot tell you. But if you are this much of a materialist dandy, in addition to the rest of his public persona, you shouldn't be calling people Pharisees. You shouldn't be calling them narcissists. And you shouldn't be calling them psychopaths just because they don't like you. He's wanted to get rid of online anonymity. Eric Weinstein actually bragged in a podcast I listened to that he did with this British podcaster named Chris Williamson or something. He talked about how when people insult him online, he just blocks them. He blocks all of them. And, everybody can do whatever they want. But he believes that these people are actually posing a dangerous threat to him, that they don't actually just disagree with his ideas. They're trying to harm him in some way. They've adopted this view that all of these people who don't respect them are like evil psychopaths because they expect the rules of the party of false decorum to apply online. They believe that the way Twitter works, the way all these sites have ever worked, and by the way, they're not wrong in the observation. This is how these sites have worked, okay? The way they work is that if you have a big following, everybody needs to kiss your ass or engage with you in intelligent ways so that you'll engage back with them or promote them or allow them to ascend within that hierarchical structure in the party of false decorum online. And it's always been that until the last few years. And it's not so much that way anymore. And now it's really not that way because people aren't afraid of talking about those verboten subjects from years past. And they can't tolerate it. They have no idea what to do with it. Why aren't you respecting our rules about how conversation is supposed to go? And if you're not going to respect the rules eventually, well, we're just going to have to punish you. He's not far off from that stage yet. He famously used to, when he was doing his live shows, I don't know if he still goes on tour or not, he used to have Dave Rubin open up for him. And Dave Rubin would brag about doing 5 minutes of comedy. Dave Rubin imagines he's a stand-up comic. He was also a Ron DeSantis simp, a supporter of the Neocons, a supporter of Ukraine, a supporter of Israel, blah, blah, blah. Probably not as hard on the Ukraine effort, I'm guessing. But he would go out and essentially just recall various lines of Jordan Peterson and make fun of woke people for 5 minutes. And that was like the crowd warming up. I'm opening for Jordan Peterson. clown show. The whole thing was such a ridiculous clown show. But Jordan Peterson used to talk about how we all have the capacity for evil within us. And that if it was us in Nazi Germany, then maybe we would have been the Nazis. And he was basically making the point that we all have this dark capacity within us. And he's certain that it's not him. And even now, while it is him, he's certain that it's not him. Let's do one more clip from Jordan Peterson, but this will go into the James Lindsay woke right part of the conversation, because that's supposedly the new thing that these people are. These people are actually the woke ones, you see. They're just like the woke left. It's not the people doing the exact same things as the woke left, pursuing all of these tactics. It's us. Now, again, I don't know if I would be identified by these people as part of this thing that they are critiquing. I understand that it's possible that I would be, based on my views and the things that I talk about. I don't know if I am mean enough online to these people. I'm not on Twitter anymore to be considered part of this problem, but I would be adjacent in their minds, I'm pretty sure. But anyhow, let's watch Jordan Peterson last night on Sean Hannity. Hold for process. And this is Poso, by the way, posting this. Jack Posobiec. Jordan Peterson appears on Hannity and promotes his report linking Christ is King to political extremism. He published a report outlining how the phrase Christ is King is political extremism for real. It's like 20 pages long or something. Might be longer than that. Let me actually just pull it up quickly. I'm not sure if we talked about this a few weeks ago or not, but Jordan Peterson in the middle of March. Man, I'm searching for that. And there's an article, and funny enough, it's actually a headline today from some website called World Watch that says, has Jordan Peterson been taken over by demons? Oh, I love it. Yeah, so Jordan Peterson, here is the machine's response. Co-authored a report titled Thy Name in Vain, How Online Extremists Hijacked Christ is King, which claims that the phrase Christ is King is being weaponized by online extremists to promote hate speech and exclusionary narratives. And he goes after Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens, who was his former colleague at the Daily Weimar. But let's listen to JBP on Hannity.
Well, I think the most important thing to do first is to draw a distinction between the political and the psychological, and not to collapse them together. So imagine this. Imagine that there's a group of individuals, about 4% of the population, who have a set of personality characteristics that have been described as dark tetrad. So they're Machiavellian. They use their language to manipulate. They're narcissistic. They want unearned social status and reputation. They're psychopathic, which makes them free of empathy and parasitical and predatory. And they're sadistic. So they take positive delight in the unnecessary suffering of others. Now, those people also use false cries of victimization, let's say, to manipulate, and they're entitled. They seek vengeance when it's unwarranted, and they protest loudly and make very public cries for reparations that would be self-serving. Okay, now the way those people operate is they look for what patterns of belief form groups that they can infiltrate and then capitalize on. And that happens on the right. We did a report, the same group, on the use of Christ as King as a manipulative strategy by bad actors, hypothetically on the right. And this report identified the same sort of people on the left. But it's not primarily political. They're wolves in sheep's clothing who look for where there's power and value and then adopt those beliefs as a surface camouflage so that they can elevate their moral status. Now, and this has become worse in recent years, as far as I'm concerned, because the evolved strategies that we have for dealing with these psychopathic types, psychopathic narcissistic types, don't work well online. And so the psychopaths can get away with their terrible manipulations online, and they can find like-minded people, and they can escape from any reputational consequences. And so there's always been psychopaths. Those are the Pharisees, for example, that Christ points to, the religious pretenders. Those are the people who use God's name in vain and claim moral virtue and even religious devotion. Well, all they're doing is feathering their own nests and furthering their own narrow interests. And the web, social media, anonymity enables them to organize and also hides them much more effectively. And this is a problem in religious organizations. It's a problem in political organizations, and it pathologizes the whole culture. You know, most people, 80% of Americans agree on virtually everything. And then there's these fringe people, and they're not political. They're psychopathological narcissists who cloak themselves in political guise. And we all have to learn to distinguish between the political and the psychological. We're not good at it.
Psychopaths. People who don't like Jordan Peterson are psychopaths. People who refuse to accept the regime's standards of conduct when it comes to certain subjects are psychopaths. And we have to make sure that we identify them and marginalize them because they're just so dangerous. You see, the other 80% of us agree about all these things. And of course, from within the bubble, it does look like 80%, I'm sure, for Jordan Peterson. The people he's around, he probably reads polls and thinks that they're real. In those elite circles, those beliefs are widely shared. There's no doubt about that. But those elite circles are no longer representative at all. Not that they ever were. I mean, the fact that they are, quote unquote, elite is already an indication that it cannot possibly be representative. You couldn't have an elite majority, for instance. Then they wouldn't be elite. They would just be the majority. But within those circles, I am certain that Jordan Peterson thinks that his views are unassailable. His opinions are broadly shared. This is where all the power and money flows from the regime. Of course, he's going to believe that these are the right views. If he's powerful, if he's wealthy, if he has a large fan base, it's because everybody in the public agrees with his ideas. He is actually the one speaking from the mouth of the majority. Now, all of that is wrong, of course, but you can't expect people like this to know the difference. He is on Fox News, on Sean Hannity's program. Fox News is the news channel of neocons. They have never had a better, neoconservatism has never had a better friend than Fox News and people like Sean Hannity. Most of the warmongering in our lifetimes, or let's say the last 30 years, has been from Fox News. And Jordan Peterson works at the Daily Weimar with Ben Shapiro, who's a neocon. And he's on Sean Hannity's show on Fox News. He's a neocon. And Pablo, for a while, was a neocon. And James Lindsay, who knows what he is, but he's certainly supportive of neoconservatism, thinking that that's the alternative. And we'll, like I said, we'll get to that in a second. But it really is incredible how it all just comes back to this same ideology. And that same ideology is directly descendant from communism and totally influential. It's the same regime that partnered with the Nazis. This is the inversion. That they think it's everyone else who's the Nazi. You see, if you weren't a Nazi, you would get on board with their program. Mind-blowing. Andrew Torba of Gab posted the link, posted the same video or a clip of the same video. And so we'll ignore the video. Formerly Twitter, based Torba. Peterson is on Rogan today. He's there to try and gaslight Joe into gatekeeping the, quote, psychopaths who dare to criticize Jews and Israel from being on his show. He claims these people do it for their own gain, when in reality they get debanked, demonized, and endlessly defamed for speaking the truth. And, of course, that's exactly right. Jordan Peterson and his ilk are in no threat of being debanked by regime bankers. They're probably not under any threat of being debanked ever, and I'm not saying that anybody should be. But Torba's exactly right. All of the risk is on the side of the people speaking out against the regime agenda and against the Uniparty agenda. That's not a source of power. I'm going to get rich doing this. Me speaking out in 2020 cost me all the people who I thought were my friends aren't. My acquaintances, my career, my reputation, and all my money. And I've been climbing out of that hole ever since. There's no power that comes with attempting to speak truth to that ultimate system of power as it exists. And of course, they're going after particularly the comedian Dave Smith, who's like milquetoast. But it's because he was arguing with Douglas Murray about Israel. And so Rogan platforming Dave Smith, well, that's going to be a problem. So now Jordan Peterson has to come in and clean up and let all of Rogan's audience know that actually, if you don't agree with Douglas Murray, it's because you're a psychopath. Here is James Lindsay today on X, formerly Twitter. He has taken it upon himself to identify the woke right and let everybody know what the woke right is. He believes that he is probably the bravest man on the internet. He also says about himself, perennial outsider, canceled by both sides, pro-America, anti-communist, anti-fascist, based AF, liberty first. Now, the most based thing that I've ever seen James Lindsay do was say, you sound vaccinated. The only problem is I'm the one who made up and popularized that phrase. So he can't take much credit for his basedness when it comes to you sound vaccinated. But today he wrote a short letter to MAGA youth and young conservatives. He says, maybe you deny it, but the facts are growing clear. Woke right is real, whether you like that name for it or not, and it is exposed. It is headed for a crash, and it will be terrible. Maybe you've been participating to be or feel, quote unquote, based, or to vent frustrations about living with woke BS, or to be funny, or to drive the boomers crazy, or to get likes and retweets or views or whatever. There are a lot of reasons for young people to buck the system that they're under and to transgress its boundaries. And that's normal and fine. You're not a bad person for having dipped into transgressive things, especially in your youth. Almost everyone does. And he goes through and talks about how there are certainly plenty of things to actually be mad about. But let's skip down because we don't need to hear this entire diatribe. James Lindsay, by the way, seems like the Steve Buscemi meme where he has the backwards ball cap and the T-shirt and the hoodie. And he says, hello, or how do you do, fellow kids? Anyway, most of you are young and feeling free and not bad people. You're having fun and it's mostly no big deal. You can and will be fine when it all goes down, so long as you didn't get in too deep or go too wild. You know there are limits, of course. You know that being edgy and transgressive can be either fun or wicked, And most of you know the difference because it's written on your hearts and was instilled in you by your parents and faith leaders up to this point. Most of you can come back no matter how bad the crash is, no matter how cringe everyone associated with all this madness looks in the rearview mirrors of tomorrow. You can just own it and move on with a laugh. Now, remember that James Lindsay is talking about things being cringe. It's going to matter in a few minutes. Also, it's interesting that he talks about faith leaders because James Lindsay is an atheist. He says, you want to do this sooner rather than later, though. You don't want to be caught in that crash in a bad way. And it's coming. These influencers who egg you on tell you no one else shares your concerns or values, but the truth is that they don't share your concerns or values. They don't care about you. They care about clicks, attention, going viral, and the almighty dollar, wherever they can get it from. And they won't care about you a bit when it all goes bad. It will, of course, be all about them in that ugly moment. This has happened before. In 1966, Mao Zedong sought to get revenge on his political enemies who had taken full control of the CCP away from him, and he launched the Cultural Revolution. The young revolutionaries he unleashed were all your age, angry young people stuck in a bad economy, created by his own massive failures that he blamed on the rest of the Communist Party. And you got to remember, in this parallel, James Lindsay, of course, is perfect, but Donald Trump is Mao Zedong. And these people on the far right or the online right or the woke right or the dissident right, or whatever they want to call it, that's their leader that they looked up to and that they were doing all of this for him, or so they thought. The Great Leap Forward had been a catastrophe across the board, and Mao mobilized young revolutionaries, his infamous Red Guard, through huge propaganda and then mobilization campaigns to find and destroy all the bad elements, capitalist roaders, people taking the capitalist road instead of the socialist road, hiding in the party, and to do it by smashing every old aspect of society, which hindered them from a bright new world, which would be a kind of socialist golden era. Smash the four olds was the slogan. They had to get rid of what you guys call neoconservatism and boomer mentality. And so Lindsay is making an overt defense of neoconservatism and establishment, quote unquote, conservatism, the establishment in general, as the thing that must be preserved. Otherwise, you are Mao. Otherwise, you are Hitler. You're trying to tear down society because you want the system to change, even though the system is the product of 250 years of this inversion. You're not allowed to have the original constitutional system. You're not allowed to get rid of the evils of this system. You're not allowed to get rid of the corruption and the rot at the highest levels. You're not even allowed to name it and identify it, because otherwise you're Mao and you're Hitler. This is what those influencers are doing for you, he says, either for clicks or for cash, some of it coming from bad places like Qatar, Russia, or China. And you see that? They're all bad places. Is Qatar a global regime proxy, at least in part? Hey, maybe. Russia and China have been identified as bad throughout our entire lives, but through the good twin, evil twin dynamic, that's not confusing. Russia, China, and Qatar, the evil twin factions, are the people funding and promoting neoconservatism around the world, which James Lindsay, Jordan Peterson, and Pablo are all downstream from, or at least want to benefit from being downstream from them. And I'm sure to various extents they do. Jordan Peterson is obviously levels more successful than James Lindsay, and James Lindsay is probably a couple levels more prominent than Pedro Gonzalez. They're artificially amplified, even when they're honest in their radical views, by bots from those countries and others, including Pakistan. So it's those extremists that are amplified by bots and not the people in the mainstream conversation supporting the establishment, with all the establishment being the body with all the money and all the power, all of the incentive the incentive structure that James Lindsay participates in downstream from that system of power. None of these people, none of this is ever supported by bots. It's not supported by the mainstream media either. They just so happen to have Jordan Peterson on Rogan and Hannity on the same day. And by the way, artificial inflation with bots happens all over the internet. I've talked about this stuff for years. The Ron DeSantis op was a major bot operation, as was the Ukraine war. Remember the whole NAFO thing? I used to theorize, and I'm pretty sure that I was right, that NAFO transformed into the Ron DeSantis op. They went from supporting the Ukraine thing to then supporting the Ron thing. All the same elements and machinations of the social media operation were present in both, including the ways that the accounts would interact. And of course, many of you witnessed me interacting with thousands and thousands of them. So I think I have a big enough sample size to understand this phenomenon. Some are probably deep state actors trying to lure MAGA patriots into a kind of 100 Flowers campaign where they say too much or go too far and destroy themselves in the process. They'll treat you like Mao treated his Red Guard too. Mao lavished praise and opportunity on his Red Guard from June of 1966 with Sweep Away the Monsters and Demons through Red August 1966 when they were led into mass violence and property destruction in Beijing and Shanghai until Liu Shaoqi, the premier of the People's Republic and Mao's newest big political enemy, was struggled, shamed, destroyed, and shipped off to die in primitive conditions in a countryside labor camp. That was just a little over a year later, peaking against him in August 1967. He died in terrible conditions in 1969, completely disgraced. The Red Guard disposed of Mao's enemies, just like these influencers praise and promote you, so you'll swarm theirs. That is incredibly convoluted. In early 1968, Mao had enough power back. Not even 2 years after he released the Red Guard, he returned to the fullness of his totalitarian power. Once there, he didn't thank the Red Guard, he punished them. The Cultural Revolution Committee was denounced and destroyed. The Red Guard youth were declared too radical and rounded up by the hundreds of thousands to be sent to the same labor camps in primitive conditions in the countryside as Liu Shaoqi was. Mao moved on to other matters and never looked back. Mao used them and didn't care about them at all. He radicalized them and taught them to go too far. And then when he got what he wanted out of it, he got rid of them permanently, declaring them enemies of the state. Do you know what phrase he used to whip them up and set them loose? It's the same one these influencers are telling you. It's actually very famous. To rebel is justified. Now, I haven't seen anybody saying that at all. But let's close this out. Mao knew their frustration and had their loyalty, and he weaponized it for his gain and then threw it away when he was done with it. He knew they were frustrated by how badly things had gone after the disastrous Great Leap Forward, Great Reset. He's like comparing those two things as though somehow the far right are the proponents of the Great Reset and not the people in the regime Lindsay is supporting. He thinks he's actually opposed to all forms of Marxism, as you see. He's both anti-communist and anti-fascist. And in the inverted view of the political spectrum, those things are on opposite sides of the political spectrum. Of course, in a proper view of the political spectrum, those two things are essentially the same thing. And of course, James Lindsay gets to evade the controlled opposition dynamic, believing that or asserting that or accepting that all the views outside the controlled opposition dynamic are just fringe views. It's not actually like that. There's not actually an an alternative, I should say, to everything within the controlled opposition dynamic. It's that that's a fringe thing that might as well not exist. So we're going to pretend that the two sides represented in the controlled opposition dynamic are actually different when they're not. They're actually just the same. But let's continue. He said, and Mao laid blame on the corruption of the party. Then he told all these angry, frustrated young people the thing they needed to hear. To rebel is justified. And they did. And they destroyed things, desecrated things, transgressed every boundary the CCP hadn't let them transgress before. And in the process, they destroyed themselves. Their families were ravaged. Their communities were ravaged. Society hated them. They had no future in the party, as they were promised, except in some cases, and in most cases had no future at all because they were disposed of. I hope you hear this and think about it. You're frustrated and having fun now. But one of the most important skills to learn is when to leave a party before it goes sideways. This one is going sideways. Don't let its excesses and its eventual crash define you. So essentially, all the people on the dissident right, the online right, the far right, people that James Lindsay calls woke for not wanting to support Israel in its war efforts. We don't want war to break out in the Middle East. And he equates that with the people, the pro-Palestine protesters in that psyop at the universities. He's saying, see that? You're the same thing. They hate Israel. You hate Israel. That's the same thing. As though the conclusions, the critiques of Israel are the same on both sides. They're not. But also assuming that none of those critiques hold any validity at all, and they're all just anti-Semitism, which is what's inside the controlled opposition dynamic. It doesn't allow for an alternative outside of that, even though there is an alternative outside of that. And that alternative actually better understands the world as it is, the history, collectivist movements, the social incentives and punishments at play here, how social media works, and numerous other things. But what he's saying is you have to leave before you become those people, because those people will eventually be disposed of. Now, what James Lindsay is admitting is the end game for that end game, right? I've talked about this many times. They're going to make Trump Hitler. They're going to make MAGA Nazis. And then at that point, once that has settled in and the public understands, oh, that's probably true, they expect their media campaign and all this propaganda to work. But once that's true, then they can be disposed of and society will accept it. And so that's just the same regime playbook playing out again, as it did in Nazi Germany, as it did in communist China. And James Lindsay believes that he is trying to save people from that fate. It's an admission that that fate is the ultimate endgame, that that thing will happen. But who's going to do that? The assumption I guess we're supposed to draw is that Donald Trump is going to be the one doing that. But Donald Trump would never be the one doing it. So who would it be? Well, of course, it would be the people who would replace Donald Trump from that side and not align with the MAGA agenda and belief structure. Who's that? That's the GOP establishment. That's neoconservatism. Those are the people James Lindsay's defending. These people are retarded. Now, this I thought was an interesting response to James Lindsay. It's a very brief one. I don't know who this is, but someone who goes by the anti-hero Kate responded to James Lindsay mocking Joe Rogan. Oh, wait, I haven't pulled this up. Hold for processing. So James Lindsay is, I guess Joe Rogan is impersonating Douglas Murray, and James Lindsay says, rest in peace, which I guess means that Rogan is toast now that he's made fun of Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray's a clown. Kate says James Lindsay uses threats, intimidation tactics, blacklisting, guilt by association, doxing, censorship, struggle sessions, slander, etc. James is actually a communist. The liberal to communist pipeline is a quick and easy ride, actually. He's a lifelong leftist. And of course, all of that is true. He does use all those tactics. And you know what? Those are all the same tactics the wokes used and all the pro-censorship people used. And just like Jordan Peterson and the rest of them, they are pro-censorship. You see those people on the fringe, they've crossed the line now because they're talking about these subjects that we've all agreed cannot be talked about. Otherwise, you give away your reputation within the party of false decorum. You must never say the no-no words or else you will be exiled. He's saying you have one chance to get back before we systematically destroy you. Oh, no, wait, sorry. It's going to be Donald Trump that systematically destroys you. Don't you understand? I mean, that's ultimately the leader. Or I guess maybe if he's not going to go that far and suggest that the Mao parallel is to Trump, I don't know who else can. But if he's going to suggest that it's just these big influencers like Raw Egg Nationalist and Jake Shields and all these other people who may well be part of InfoOps, by the way, I don't follow or like these people's work. I don't care that they think that they're very strong men and blah, 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 and that they say all the things you're not allowed to say. Some of them are absolutely in an info op. And I've talked many times on this podcast about saying there is a pro-Nazi op out there attempting to pull MAGA in. So there is some of this. I'm not saying the observation that they're making is entirely wrong. That thing may well exist, okay? But that thing exists as part of a controlled opposition dynamic to make any conversation about these subjects verboten. And so they're playing the two sides here. And the ultimate end to that is that all of the people who have identified in those certain ways, once the split and reversal happens, all those people can be destroyed. And of course, he's right about the influencers not being destroyed. They won't be because, of course, they're part of the info op and they know when to get out before their followers do, which is why you don't get in with these kinds of people in the first place. And I believe that the path out of that is understanding the controlled opposition dynamic and being able to recognize it here. But James Lindsay is just on the other side of that controlled opposition dynamic. So the tactics are exactly the same as what we saw from the woke left and what we saw from the pro-censorship people. And speaking of James Lindsay using the word cringe, this is James Lindsay posting himself. Here's an old video of me throwing and catching a Chinese longsword for the haters to remix for me. And of course, yes, it's haters. You've got so many haters. It's not that you're a massive dork. Yes. So that's number one. And then let's go to the very famous Lindsay sword video. This is actually this guy. And that is incredible to me. That someone could be this dorky and still act yes.
I'm holding out for a hero till the end of the night. He's gotta be strong and he's gotta be fast and he's gotta be fresh from the fight. I need a hero. I'm holding out for a hero till the morning light. He's gotta be sure and he's gotta be soon and he's gotta be larger than life. Larger than life.
God. I'm probably going to get taken off of YouTube for that song being in the background. This is what we are seeing now. There is obviously a coordinated effort to push this out into the public conversation. Apparently, Jordan Peterson's report on how Christ is King is an extremist dog whistle was not enough. So now it's going wider and wider, and we should expect that this will be an ongoing theme. Now, as I said, there is actually an op there designed to sucker people in to that whole thing. But all we have to do to avoid that is not act that way. Okay? You don't have to stop talking about the downsides, the negatives about Israel. I talk about the negatives of the United States of America. I can't talk about the negatives of a foreign country that is a regime proxy state, similar to Ukraine, probably too similar. Why can't I talk about those things? Because then I become the Nazi. Oh, yeah, that's right. And then they get to systematically destroy you, destroy your life, destroy your reputation, destroy your financial life, and ultimately kill you. Brain Strain again in the chat says, Jordan Peterson thinks he will be in the elite group who gets to punish wrong thinkers for thinking wrongly. I agree. He does think he gets to be in that group. And, you know, there are people at that level who may someday get to be in that group. And Jordan Peterson may well be one of them starting this ARC thing. If that proves useful and effective for them, there's no reason why they wouldn't make Jordan Peterson the next Klaus Schwab. And I mean, I've said before, Klaus Schwab is a mid-level manager, but there's no reason why they couldn't get him going that far. And we will actually talk about Klaus in just a second. But speaking of other evil members of the regime, let's first go to the so-called king of the United Kingdom, creepy old Charles. I see that he's looking more kingly than he was when his very disturbing looking hands were playing the carrot flute a few weeks back. But Vanity Fair writes why Charles won't be at the Pope's funeral. So he will not be attending. Donald Trump will be. I believe it's on Saturday. And I think this is a guess. We don't need to go through this article, by the way. If I had to guess, I would imagine that Donald Trump will once again be presented as the king of the world, as he was when he visited Notre Dame Cathedral for the reopening last fall. And you know what? We might as well go through just a couple of paragraphs of this. Prince William attended Pope Francis's funeral Pope Francis's funeral on behalf of King Charles. Kensington Palace confirmed on Tuesday. Interesting. The Prince of Wales will join world leaders, including President Donald Trump, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, and at the funeral service at St. Peter's Basilica. King Charles, the last head of state to have an audience with Pope Francis, and I guess J.D. Vance just doesn't count, will not travel to the Vatican in accordance with protocol and precedents, which dictates that the sovereign does not attend funerals. The attendance of Prince William alongside world leaders highlights the vital role he plays as heir. When Pope John Paul II died in April 2005, Charles and Queen Camilla's wedding was delayed as Charles was required to attend in place of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And we might as well finish this out. King Charles and Queen Camilla visited the late Pope during their tour of Italy 2 weeks ago. The meeting took place at Casa Santa Maria, where Pope Francis died on Easter Monday morning. Charles and Camilla were celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary and received a gift from the Pope during the private meeting. King Charles has spoke of the devastating loss of Pope Francis and said that he and Queen Camilla remember with particular affection their meetings with the Pope over the years and, quote, were greatly moved to have been able to visit him earlier in the month. As a mark of respect for the pontiff, flags were flown at half-mast at palaces around the country, just like Trump did for all U.S. installations around the world. Pope Francis died Monday, blah, blah, blah. So the king will not attend. He was, however, the last head of state to have seen the Pope. And again, proof of life. Just as we had with JD the other day, the Pope was definitely still alive when the king saw him, definitely still alive when JD saw him. And you can't doubt it, or else you are a dirty, deranged conspiracy theorist. But let's get back to, so we have King Charles, and I would encourage everybody to search for Charles in Prussiagate, in the Prussiagate series, because that man is a demon and one of the most evil globalists who could ever be imagined, as far as I'm concerned. And then you've got Pope Francis, the Jesuit, who is down with the program in full from Argentina. And hey, just saying, I'm sure that Argentina is a lovely place with a vast, overwhelming majority of lovely people, but also a whole lot of Nazis. And, you know, who knows what influence that might have. But let's go to someone who is more directly descended from that particular regime. Klaus Schwab, formerly of the World Economic Forum, no longer from the World Economic Forum. The Wall Street Journal, just yesterday, World Economic Forum opens new probe into founder Klaus Schwab. World Economic Forum founder Klaus Schwab is under investigation by the organization he created after a new whistleblower letter alleged financial and ethical misconduct by the longtime leader and his wife. The anonymous letter was sent last week to the forum's board and raised concerns about the forum's governance and workplace culture, including allegations that the Schwab family mixed their personal affairs with the forum's resources without proper oversight, according to the letter and people familiar with the matter. It included allegations that Klaus Schwab asked junior employees to withdraw thousands of dollars from ATMs on his behalf and used forum funds to pay for private in-room massages at hotels. It also alleged that his wife, Hilda, a former forum employee, scheduled token forum-funded meetings in order to justify luxury holiday travel at the organization's expense. Klaus Schwab in recent days argued against an investigation, telling board members that he denied the unsubstantiated allegations and that he would challenge them in a lawsuit. The People said the Board of Trustees has decided to open a probe during an emergency meeting. And, I just realized I forgot to put the article up. But, you know, seeing the article is not that glorious. It just looks like an article. Klaus said, actually, we'll just get to that in the next thing. So this is the World Economic Forum announcing that Klaus is stepping down. And so it seems like with the timing of the formal announcement, the formal leaving of Klaus Schwab, this letter was the impetus for that. And it may well have been in the view of the board on Sunday. But Klaus had announced he was leaving a while back. Maybe he knew something like this was coming. Maybe he knew people had found this out, or maybe this is all just not a big deal because Klaus Schwab funded the World Economic Forum. And in that article in the Wall Street Journal, his case that he makes is that whatever was expensed to the World Economic Forum, that fell in the domain of personal expenses was paid back. And who knows whether or not that's true. It's largely irrelevant. Here is the World Economic Forum's announcement. The World Economic Forum announces governance transition. Klaus Schwab has informed the board following my recent announcement. No, I can't do that. Man, I used to be able to do a good Klaus, but I'm not sure I can now. And I don't want to do a terrible impression. Following my recent announcement, and as I enter my 88th year, I have decided to step down from the position of chair and as a member of the board of trustees with immediate effect. At an extraordinary board meeting on 20 April, the board of trustees took note of the resignation of Klaus Schwab. In accordance with the forum's rules and regulations, the board unanimously appointed vice chairman Peter Brebeck-Letmath as chairman ad interim. It also established a search committee for the selection of a future chair. The board acknowledged the outstanding achievements of the retired chairman and founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. He created the leading global platform for dialogue and progress. And the board expressed its gratitude for his 55 years of relentless leadership at the helm of the forum. So since he was 33 years old. At a time when the world is undergoing rapid transformation, the need for inclusive dialogue to navigate complexity and shape the future has never been more critical. The Board of Trustees of the World Economic Forum underlines the importance of remaining steadfast in its mission and values as a facilitator of progress. Building on its trusted role, the forum will continue to bring together leaders from all sectors and regions to exchange insights and foster collaboration. Oh, I'm sure they will be great. Now, let's talk about the new leader, Peter Brebeck-Letmath. And actually, before we do that, let's take a little peek at another page on the World Economic Forum website. You know that I love the World Economic Forum partners page, and I love the code of conduct page that basically says, in your business and in your personal conduct, anything that the public could find out about, you have to conform to the agenda of the World Economic Forum. And if you do, then you get to be a partner. And some of the biggest transnational corporations, most of them, are partners of the World Economic Forum, which means that all those corporations need to implement the agenda and conform to the agenda and never speak out against the agenda of the World Economic Forum. What impact might that have on how corporate life operates and how corporations interface with the public? I would suggest it has a pretty big impact on them. So they've replaced Klaus with this creepy character here, and I'll be sure to find a picture of him with his really disgusting eye. I don't know why there are so many pictures of this man looking this way, but I'll actually just share this meme that I saw earlier today. So I guess his eye has been or was somehow destroyed. Maybe he had eye surgery. I don't know. But very disgusting. And the meme, of course, brings in the Terminator once his eye had been blown apart in the film. But let's look at the World Economic Forum's leadership and governance. So this is the board of trustees, and you see Queen Rania Al Abdullah of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, Mark Benioff. I think that's the I always forget what his company is. Something space, and it's not coming to me right now. Salesforce. That's why I mess it up. It's not space. So he's the Salesforce guy. You got Larry Fink of BlackRock, Al Gore, who we just discussed, the cellist Yo-Yo Ma, Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, John McCain's wife, Cindy McCain. Really is pretty incredible. Oh, there's David Rubenstein. We know him. He's the man that owns the documents in the archives and is attempting to control and revise all of our history. On the board of the World Economic Forum. They've got a new president and CEO, Borja. I bet it's Borja. Borja Brendi? I don't know. Borga, maybe? Whatever. And you can go through the rest of their leadership, their executive committee. I'm sure if you dug into any of these people, you would find that the roster of the World Economic Forum is just a rogues gallery through and through. But let's find out a little bit more about this man, Brebeck. He is the man at Nestle. And I want to just make sure that I give you his proper title here. An Austrian businessman who played a pivotal role at Nestle, the world's largest food and beverage company. He joined Nestle in 1968 and spent a significant part of his early career in Latin America, holding leadership roles in Chile, Ecuador, and Venezuela. He returned to Switzerland and ascended through the company's ranks, becoming CEO in 1997 and later chairman and CEO, serving in these top positions until 2008. After stepping down as CEO, he remained chairman until 2017 when he became chairman emeritus. And that is interesting, the emeritus title, because Nancy Pelosi is still going by Speaker Emerita, which is the feminine form. You are still that high command. You're just not there anymore, but throughout the rest of your life, you're going to retain that title. Now, why does Nancy Pelosi have that title? I'm not aware of anybody ever being Speaker Emeritus before, or any other government position being emeritus, but we're in weird times. So at Nestle, let's briefly discuss some of what this man was doing. So this is Time Magazine from October of 2015. Lawsuit alleges illegal water use by Nestle in drought-stricken California. A group of environmental organizations filed suit against the U.S. Forest Service on Tuesday, alleging that the government agency allowed Nestle to bottle water in California on an expired permit. The lawsuit, filed in U.S. District Court, calls on the Forest Service to shut down immediately a 4-mile pipeline that transports water from Strawberry Creek to a bottling facility. The permit in question expired in 1988, according to the lawsuit. The plaintiffs demand that the Forest Service conduct another review that takes into account environmental impacts, according to the lawsuit. Nestle is not a party to the suit. So Nestle was continuing to get water from, and I would guess they're not party to the suit because Nestle is in the protected class of the regime, as are the environmentalists. So they figured out a way to do a friendly lawsuit, I would imagine. We also have this from Nestle, regarding Nestle, from The Guardian. And this was in October of 2019. The fight to stop Nestle from taking America's water to sell in plastic water bottles. And we don't need to go through much of this. But the network of clear streams comprising California's Strawberry Creek, same place, run down the side of a steep rocky mountain in a national forest 2 hours east of Los Angeles. Last year, Nestle siphoned 45 million gallons of pristine spring water from the creek and bottled it under the Arrowhead Water label. Though it's on federal land, the Swiss bottled water giant paid the U.S. Forest Service and state practically nothing, and it profited handsomely. Nestle Water's 2018 worldwide sales exceeded $7.8 billion. Conservationists say some creek beds in the area are now bone dry, and once gushing springs have been reduced to mere trickles. And so we talked about water control a few months back with the California fires. Donald Trump's story is that he sent in the Army Corps of Engineers and reopened the water supply. And now suddenly the droughts are gone. The droughts were part of climate change. They were caused by climate change. They weren't caused because all these rivers were dammed up to change the environment, to change real estate values for a number of reasons. And this happens all over the country. Obviously, it's still happening. It wasn't for any of that. It wasn't for control over the water supply, even though the Resnick family in California, as we discussed at the time, the Palm Wonderful family, controlled an inordinate amount of California water. And Rick Caruso, who was the hero of the LA fire period, was he started out in California politics on the California in the Department of Water and Power. So clearly control over a critical resource. Now, what have we talked about as the ways that the regime, the five branches of regime control as I see them: control over media, control over finance, control over resources, control over trade routes, control over military, specifically the U.S. military. Control over resources is a huge one. And if you sell to the public that there are droughts due to climate change, and therefore water is going to be a lot more scarce and a lot more expensive than it was before, well, you've taken something that makes up 70% of the earth and reclassified it as a scarce resource and convinced people to believe you while you're also convincing them that the polar ice caps are melting and water levels and sea levels are rising. But of course, we can't do desalination. We need this fresh water. And unfortunately, the fresh water, that's what's droughting. Of course, the oceans are still there. And the oceans are actually, rising because of the polar ice cap melting. But we're running out of water on land, and desalination's not an option. The only thing that's an option is getting the global regime to fix the system for us. And when you think about the gasoline that powers our cars, the fossil fuels that power our economies, we are told, at least when it comes to the oil, the gasoline, the dinosaur juice, that it's going to run out. And it's also destroying the planet. So we're going to need to move on from that. And that's what we're told about all these resources. They're going to run out. There's not enough of these, even though you could fit the entire world's population into a landmass the size of Texas at the population density of New York City. With all the rest of the world, then totally natural wilderness. You could do that. I'm not suggesting that happens. It's never going to happen. But you could do that. But yet, all of these resources, totally scarce. And they're solving the energy scarcity problems with next generation technology that is obviously on its way right now. A resurgence of nuclear power, a resurgence of various kinds of solar power. And if you listened to Badlands Story Hour last week, you would have heard retired Lieutenant General Stephen Quast of the Air Force and then the Space Force discussing energy capture and transmission in ways that make it quite clear we're not going to have an energy problem in the future. Donald Trump often says drill, baby, drill, but of course there's a lot more than that. And energy scarcity is not what it once was. And the public is beginning to wake up to that understanding. So, what can you control? Well, let's try controlling the water. It seems to be the only logical next step. Now, let's give this creepy old Austrian who is best friends with Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, a chance to speak up for his side of things when it comes to water.
Hello, I'm Peter Pravec, the chairman of Nestle. There are apparently some misconceptions about my ideas on water. Let me make it clear from the beginning. I've always supported the human right to water. Everyone should have enough clean, safe water to meet their fundamental daily needs. About 50 to 100 liters per day. But not to fill a pool or wash a car. There is a difference. We must transform the way we think about water. By 2025, 1.8 billion people will be living in regions without enough water. Water scarcity is the greatest challenge we face today. And we need to start recognizing water as a precious resource. Therefore, water should be better managed, should be better valued, and has to be better preserved. If we give water value, there will be an incentive to invest in looking after our supply. You know, most of fresh water we use, up to 90% in fact, is used in agriculture. As a food producer, we depend on the long-term sustainable availability of this precious resource. In our factories, we have reduced our use of water by more than half in the last 10 years. But we are not alone. We work with others to exchange ideas and innovations and to advocate on the importance of water. I'm glad water is top of the agenda today. It's where it should stay. And thanks you for taking the time to be part of this conversation.
So how about that? He said that it's extreme to call water a human right, but he knows that it's important for all humans to have it. It's, of course, important to drink. And you can have it within a certain limit. But if you want to, like, water your lawn or wash your car, there's not going to be enough water for them. Now, why do people need bottled water? Some people need it because they need the transportability of water, and that's fine. But primarily, people drink bottled water because the water where they live through the tap is unsuitable for drinking because it's poisoned by Peter Brabeck's friends. Let us continue. Now, the World Economic Forum has chosen to make it quite clear that, hold on now. I think I pulled up the wrong link. The World Economic Forum has made it quite clear that the impending water crisis, as they call it, this, of course, would be part of the polycrisis. It is going to be devastating. Here is a crazy lady at the World Economic Forum in 2022. Her name is Professor Mariana Mazzucato, founding director of the UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. I think that's University College of London, if I'm not mistaken. And without further ado, let's hear what this lunatic has to say.
Can I add something just based on what you've just said? That's also, of course, true with COVID, right? We are all only as healthy as our neighbor is in our street, in our city, in our region, in our nation, and globally. Did we solve that? Like, did we actually manage to vaccinate everyone in the world? No. So highlighting water as a global commons and what it means to work together and see it both out of that kind of global commons perspective, but also the self-interest perspective, because it does have that parallel. It's not only important, but it's also important because we haven't managed to solve those problems, which had similar attributes. And water is something that people understand. You know, climate change is a bit abstract. Some people understand it really well. Some understand it a bit. Some just don't understand it. Water, every kid knows how important it is to have water. When you're playing football and you're thirsty, you need water. So there's also something about really getting citizen engagement around this and really, in some ways, experimenting with this notion of the common good. Can we actually deliver this time in ways that we have failed miserably other times? And hopefully we won't keep failing on the other things, but anyway.
So the common good, let me just back up to an earlier moment of this same panel because she had a description of what she calls the common good.
And the review that will be coming out, which I'm sure Tarman will get to, is going to be called the Review on Water as a Common Good. And that word, common good, is actually a radical word, because in economics we have notions of the public good. It sounds good because the second word is good, but it's really framed more as a correction for something the private sector is not doing. And what water as a common good requires is an objective of what we can actually do together. And what's interesting is that when we have objectives, especially during urgent periods, think of what, we just lived through a health pandemic with all these COVID-19 recovery plans, not in all countries, but also war, where all of a sudden money literally comes out of the woodwork after we were told there was no money. Think of Germany, overnight 100 billion, and how it was calculated was that it would be seen as an investment, not a cost, so it didn't actually go into the deficit figures. This is all just kind of accounting and game playing with numbers. We don't do that for some reason with our wicked challenges or societal challenges. We tend to only do that mainly with military industrial complex kind of problems, but also as we saw with the health pandemic when millions of people are dying. So one of the issues is if water is as urgent of a problem as some of the top climate scientists like Johan have been telling us, by the way, for many years, we're just starting to listen now, how do we turn it, A, into an urgent problem? And the numbers are quite astounding. We might come back to some of the other numbers that you talked about this morning, which are quite shocking, but also an intersectoral problem. We shouldn't see water as a sector, but water as a common good means it has to be seen as cross-sectorally across many different kind of solutions across sectors as different as nutrition and construction, everything. But also in terms of coming back to the new economic thinking, it means seeing the role of government, which is so important. It's not the only actor, but it's a key actor, as a market co-creator and a market shaper in the system. So the policies themselves need to be framed in terms of shaping and not market fixing, because that's just going to patch up the system. And central to that, and I know Tarman will talk more about it, it really is this kind of getting rid of this public-private divide. This is going to require huge amounts of collaboration, huge amounts of co-investment and finance, and how to actually design that with a common good lens is one of the really innovative things that this group is going to provide. And lastly, we shouldn't forget that even though urgent periods make us kind of create money and do things that we weren't doing before, sometimes that speed can also create problems. Things can kind of pass by if someone just kind of presses on the speed of the speed pedal. And that's where we have to be careful, because issues of equity and justice are incredibly important. So one of the things that are going to be very, key is in terms of the voices that we're bringing to the commission, but also not using fluffy language like we're all in this together. Actually, there's going to be some real changes that will have to be made to business models, the way governments work, the way they relate one to another, and to the fact that so many voices haven't been at the table, even with climate, to be honest. We haven't brought many different voices to the table. So issues to make sure that this is an inclusive approach, is equitable, and has justice at the center is also part of the common good framing.
Okay. So what she just said is more communistic and more fascistic than anything I've ever seen anybody on the right, anyone in the MAGA base or the online problem causers, troll society, etc., ever say. She wants the public-private divide eliminated. She wants to use government as a market creator and market controller. She said there's a new economic system that they need to adjust to. And she describes the common good as a correction to what the markets get wrong. That means that she is 100% in control of markets. If you were for free markets, then you would understand the markets don't get things wrong. It's amazing. I love when these people just are in their circles, because they tell the truth as they see it. And then when we say, oh, look, did you just hear that thing she said? They're like, I didn't mean that thing. You'd understand better if you just knew the broader context. But then again, if I thought what they were saying was good, they'd be like, yes, you got it exactly right. So look forward to your water crisis. Now, I don't think that there's going to be any real water crisis, and I don't think that these people will ever win and ever get to implement these programs. But they are going after control over the resources to solve the problem, and that will be after, of course, they control the physical resource itself. And I didn't mention this, man, we haven't talked about this in a while. At some point, maybe I want to do a video about it or something, but because it's just so crazy. But Donald Trump has said at various times, I attacked California. We had a skirmish in California. I invaded California. A bunch of really strong statements. And you might remember the one day I talked about it where he was in one of those press meetings in the Oval Office, staring directly at the camera, saying, I attacked California. There's been military vehicles down in Pacific Palisades since the fires, or at least there were as of a few weeks ago, last time my friend out there updated me on it. Like Humvees and smoke rising from the ground 4 months later. I don't know what's going on there, but something's weird. One day we will advance to the point where we can discuss whether or not it would be justified to have military operations happening in the United States against people in the United States or property in the United States. And I would suspect that exactly that kind of war has been waged against us in the United States by the global regime, by the Uniparty faction for decades. In fact, many of our natural disasters I would put in that category. But we will leave that aside for the day. Apparently, water will be the next crisis. One more example of that. And this man, President Tarman, he was this guy right here, second from the left. He was sitting next to Marianne Mazzucato, or whatever her name is, in 2022. Here he is in 2024. Solving the issue of water is low-hanging fruit in tackling the climate crisis. That's what he's saying. Governments and organizations need to understand the role water plays in the economy and climate change, said the panel in a discussion about the resource and its role in achieving sustainability. This would help accelerate and scale up solutions looking at efficient management of water and also help advise policy around water pricing, said the panelists, who included the members of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, of which Mr. Tarman is a co-chair. And as we saw, he was also a higher up in the World Economic Forum. The commission is a global project to transform water governance. Mr. Tarman said solving the problems around water management is achievable within a reasonable period of time, quote, if we organize ourselves well and if we finance this so that everyone benefits. And by everyone, he means stakeholders, because the World Economic Forum pursues stakeholder capitalism. Who are the stakeholders? Governments that are aligned with the agenda, corporations, media figures, politicians, etc. All of these people, the partners of the World Economic Forum, and everybody who is a World Economic Forum leader, etc., all in that same thing. They're the stakeholders. The capitalism is for them. The corporate and the state, the governance bodies joining used to be fascism. Now, stakeholder capitalism. What's required are changes in the way we govern water, together with biodiversity and everything else that it takes to solve the climate crisis. It's changes in governance and changes in the way we finance. So they need technology to be scaled up. And, they go through the whole conversation here. Obviously, you can find this link yourself and watch the video if you like. The problem is that we don't often realize what the economic value is and how that actually impacts us as people. And this is another one of the panelists, a woman named Kristen Schweit, I bet is how they say it. Something ridiculous like that. We need to include the assessment of fresh water availability in our risk assessments as corporates as part of water stewardship, and be prepared for what will come over the years as climate change is going to be impacting us wherever we sit, she said. Mr. Ulrich Gernau, of a Danish pump manufacturer, said, if there is a fair price of water, it will incentivize investment in water. It will incentivize actually innovating in water, putting new solutions in place, encouraging startups to actually come into this, because there's actually good return on investment of actually doing the work. So they are going to control a resource, make that resource scarce, and then profit off the scarcity, telling the public this is how we have solved the problem. We've seen them do it with other resources. It is obviously the agenda here. And I do not think that it is any mistake that Mr. Nestle is the new World Economic Forum leader. Now, if you are one of the sorts of people who believe that all of this is under some level of control by people who are putting these globalists in position to expose themselves, well, hey, maybe there's something to that. Klaus Schwab was so comically evil that it was hard not to immediately understand, oh, hey, maybe this World Economic Forum thing is not as good as they claim to be. Easy in that instance. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I'm glad this guy's out there in front of it. I'm glad the conversations are going to be had. They got to be had. This is from this morning, changing subjects without a segue. Well, it's kind of ancillary. I mean, the World Economic Forum is part of the same regime that the people who took over Ukraine in 2014 and began the war are part of. They also do happen to have the descendants of those very same Nazis right there in that very same ancestral home of the Khazarian Empire. It's part of the next Israel that they wanted. They were going to put Israel at any of 10 places. If you believe that Israel, the proxy state that exists now, is the biblical Israel, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know how anybody gets there, except by saying, well, this is prophesied and now it exists. This is what it is. So it is the same thing that was prophesied. Okay. I mean, I think you're going well around the bend, but hey, man, everybody's got their own beliefs. Trump slams Zelensky for rejecting Ukraine-Russia negotiations, saying a deal was very close. And we're going to get to his post in just a moment, but just for some of the update here, President Donald Trump slammed Ukrainian leader Volodomyr Zelensky on Wednesday, accusing him of derailing negotiations to end the war in Ukraine while a peace deal was very close. So everything collapsed today. Zelensky wants Trump to visit Ukraine, but jumping down to the end, high-level talks aimed at bringing a pause to fighting in Ukraine disintegrated earlier after Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff pulled out, dealing a blow to Kyiv's hopes for a short-term peace agreement. While ministerial talks that had been planned in London fell apart, Trump's special envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, still planned to meet with Ukrainian Presidential Chief of Staff Andrei Yermak, who arrived in London early Wednesday with the Ukrainian defense ministers. The parties agreed to continue the dialogue. So let us go to the post of one Donald John. I was going to say Jay, but then I was like, John. Trump. This is from this morning. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the comedic actor in Ukraine, is boasting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that, quote, Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. There's nothing to talk about here, end quote. This statement is very harmful to the peace negotiations with Russia, in that Crimea was lost years ago under the auspices of President Barack Hussein Obama and is not even a point of discussion. Nobody is asking Zelensky to recognize Crimea as Russian territory, but if he wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired? The area also houses, for many years before the Obama handover, major Russian submarine bases. It's inflammatory statements like Zelensky's that makes it so difficult to settle this war. He has nothing to boast about. The situation for Ukraine is dire. He can have peace, or he can fight for another 3 years before losing the whole country. I have nothing to do with Russia, but have much to do with wanting to save, on average, 5,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers a week who are dying for no reason whatsoever. The statement made by Zelensky today will do nothing but prolong the killing field, and nobody wants that. We are very close to a deal, but the man with no cards to play, in quotes, should now finally get it done. I look forward to being able to help Ukraine and Russia get out of this complete and total mess that would have never started if I was president. And that is quite a statement. There's a lot there. First of all, it would have never started if I was president. Well, if Donald Trump was president, there would have been no reason to start it. The global regime would have relented, thus allowing Donald Trump to be president. They would have relented to the extent that Donald Trump could have been president for that time. But I imagine they were worried that he would not give up power at the end of that 4 years if they were able to outlast it without demolishing their whole program. So instead, Donald Trump took a step back, took a 4-year respite that we refer to as the devolution term. And the war, to the extent there is a war, began. Crimea has been Russia for 10 years. The Donbass and Lugansk and these other territories that are being fought over are also Russian territory. But Russia might relinquish the claim to that territory, allowing them to be independent republics. That was the status quo ante. That is what things were supposed to be. That was the deal before the very brutal invasion ever began. And they're apparently going to get right back to that deal, however many iterations of this it takes. We're about to sign the mineral deal. No, now we can't. We're about to have peace. No, now we can't. Zelensky is going to continue being the problem until every last globalist has submitted. And if that takes another 3 years, it seems to me that Donald Trump is telling the global regime, if you want to keep going, we'll just keep this going. We can make Zelensky keep saying these things and refusing to sign the deal. And you can try to blame it on us, and you can try to connect us to Russia and blame it on us and Russia. It's not Zelensky's fault. It's not the regime's fault that the war is still going. It's our fault. You can do that. It's not going to work. So what we have is the comedic actor in Ukraine, who seems more all the time to be controlled by our side rather than the other side. All Zelensky has done is expose the global regime and made people reconsider what the end of World War II actually amounted to. How is it that Ukraine has so many Nazis? What does that mean? That they're also the ancestral homeland of the same people who set up Israel while being Nazis. What does that mean? Well, we can't talk about those things. Otherwise, Jordan Peterson's going to call us a psychopath. But I think it probably matters a little bit. And so all of those people are getting exposed as the neocons and the warmongers and the globalists they are, as this process continues to progress and elongate. The longer the Ukraine war lasts, considering Russia's role, considering the American role, to the extent people are still dying there in conflict, that's bad. But otherwise, it's only destroying the global regime and their grip over one of their proxy states, maybe their most important proxy state, because it's their ancestral home in Europe. That might be totally gone in another few years, and they can keep this story riding out for that long. By the end of it, no one will support Ukraine anywhere. And so what then? Israel wants to have a war with Iran. We've seen the neocons and the warmongers like Mark Levin, and then this guy, Mark Coleman, who was very pro-Trump, who's been very pro-Trump for years. My friend Ghost of Base Patrick Henry posted this the other day. See if I can find it quickly. Really crazy post. Actually, we can do Levin's post too, now that we are on it. So these are not the sorts of people that would be called woke right by James Lindsay for whatever reason. They are through and through neoconservatives. But let's start with the Ron Coleman repost or retweet of a post by someone who goes by the Misfit Patriot. And by the way, the Misfit Patriot is a big supporter of James Lindsay. I'm okay with as many dead kids as it takes to stop Hamas, says the Misfit Patriot on X, formerly Twitter, reposted by Ron Coleman. You people sound like woke leftists trying to make an emotional argument so you can argue from a position of moral superiority. You might as well put a rainbow flag and pronouns in your bio. If you try to emotionally blackmail me, I will pull your effing card. Oh, gosh. Does that mean you're going to tweet about us, Misfit Patriot? Gosh, you sound so strong. Literally every single Palestinian can die if that's what it takes to save Israel. How many kids were in Sodom and Gomorrah? God didn't give a F about how many because the number of people who were righteous was 0. So now he's placing himself in the position of God, determining that the righteousness of everyone in Palestine is 0, therefore everyone can be killed. That's pretty amazing for someone who's not part of the woke right, who's actually one of the fighters of the woke right, definitely not a Nazi, not this guy. He's the one who's defending from Nazis. Can't you tell in his language? What about the firstborn of the children in Egypt? How many children died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? All of them. That's my acceptable cost. Palestinians raped and murdered 1,200 innocent people after paragliding go-karts flew over the most secured border in the history of the world. But let's continue. Took Americans hostage. F them and their whole bloodline. You effing pussies don't give a F about all the tragedies of the world until it's the people who chant death to America. F them and F you too. You got it? This is the alternative to the woke right. You see, we're not the wokes, or they're not the wokes. We are. We're so woke. We've always been. If there's one thing we are, it's woke. These people are insane. But let's go to the great one, Mark Levin. And by the way, Trump just short-circuited Mark Levin last week by placing him on some insignificant Homeland Security board. Mark Levin says, in the end, Israel will need to take out those Iranian nuclear sites regardless of who does or does not support them and regardless of negotiations. 80 years ago, our troops liberated several of the Nazi death camps. Eisenhower was beyond shocked at what he saw, as were the other generals and soldiers. It is memorialized in films available on the internet. October 7th proved, yet again, that the Jews in Israel cannot tolerate a sworn enemy, this time with the most destructive weapons on earth. That praises Hitler and this is the sworn enemy with the most destructive weapons on earth. That praises Hitler and the Third Reich and repeatedly warns it will annihilate Israel and the United States. And of course, funds all the terrorist groups and regimes that surround it. To allow this threat to stand would be the greatest failure of one generation to the next, perhaps ever, and not only in Israel, but in the United States as well. Really? Not supporting Israel bombing Iran on the predicate that Iran is creating nuclear weapons which probably don't exist, to later destroy Israel. If we don't do that, that is the biggest loss in the history of the world. Well, on whose part would that be the biggest loss? First off, Donald Trump's talking about denuclearization with China and Russia. And to think that he's doing that in the same world where all of these rogue states possess nuclear weapons and Iran is about to get one, Iran is going to have a nuclear power program. Period. That nuclear power program is unacceptable to people like Mark Levin, so it's reframed as a nuclear weapons program. And then Israel has to go to war with them no matter what, even if the U.S. is not involved. Well, good luck. On whose behalf would they have to do that if the U.S. is not involved, because the American people don't want it, and the American president isn't going to do it, and the American military is not going to participate. Who is Mark Levin therefore supporting? Well, Israel first, not America first. And of course he's Israel first. And hey, man, if people want to be Israel first, move to Israel. Or just be Israel first and be honest about it. But don't pretend that you are American and America first, because you're not. And, Mark Levin is using much more careful language than the misfit patriot. But it's the same agenda. And people like Mark Levin and all of the DeSantis simps, just crazy coincidence. They were saying things, Kurt Schlichter, glass the desert after 10/7. Glass Gaza. I guess that the idea would be you bomb the sand so much that the sand turns into glass. And we're the psychopaths? These people are insane. So, Axios today. Trump peace plan requires Ukraine to accept Russian occupation. The U.S. expects Ukraine's response Wednesday to a peace framework, and we can skip past that. The one-page document the U.S. presented Ukrainian officials in Paris last week describes this as President Trump's final offer. The White House insists it's ready to walk away if the parties don't make a deal soon. Trump's proposal would require major concessions from Ukrainian President Volodomyr Zelensky, who previously ruled out accepting Russia's occupation of Crimea and four regions in eastern Ukraine and parts of four regions in eastern Ukraine. And while Russian President Vladimir Putin had reportedly offered to freeze the current front lines in order to reach a deal, he has previously rejected other elements of the U.S. framework, such as a European peacekeeping force on Ukrainian territory. And of course, a source close to the Ukrainian government said Kyiv sees the proposal as highly biased toward Russia. The proposal says very clearly what tangible gains Russia gets, but only vaguely and generally says what Ukraine is going to get. Well, Ukraine doesn't get anything because they've lost a war. There was no point at which they were ever winning or ever pushing back or ever making progress. They were only, to the extent a war ever happened, losing the war. Now, I believe that a war has happened. I just don't believe that it started. Well, it certainly didn't start in 2022. So to believe that a war started in 2022 and has now lasted for 3 years is already insane from the beginning. So is there conflict ongoing for the last 3 years? Maybe. I'm sure there's maybe some conflict somewhere. But it didn't start in 2022. What Russia would get under Trump's proposal? De jure U.S. recognition of Russian control in Crimea. So the U.S. would officially recognize Russia or Crimea as part of Russia. De facto recognition of Russia's occupation of nearly all of Luhansk Oblast and the occupied portions of Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. Let's continue. I was going to comment, but we'll keep going. A promise that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. The text notes that Ukraine could become a part of the European Union. The lifting of sanctions imposed since 2014, enhanced economic cooperation with the U.S., particularly in the energy and industrial sectors. And I can imagine that it'll probably be a military agreement as well, in terms of how the North Pole region is secured by Russia, China, and the United States. What Ukraine gets under Trump's proposal, involving a robust security guarantee involving an ad hoc group of European countries and potentially also like-minded non-European countries. The document is vague in terms of how this peacekeeping operation would function and does not mention any U.S. participation. The return of a small part of Kharkiv, unimpeded passage of the Dnieper River, compensation and assistance for rebuilding, though the document does not say where the funding will come from. The Zaporozhye nuclear power plant will be considered as Ukrainian territory, but operated by the U.S. with electricity supplied to both Ukraine and Russia, which means the U.S. would obviously be securing that. And the document references Ukraine minerals deal. So virtually all of that was exactly what the situation was in 2022 before the very brutal invasion. How is that possible? And what could it possibly mean that the deal to end the Ukraine war will be the same as it was, the same deal that was in place before the war began, considering that the war began in 2014? The deal before the war began was exactly this, as far as Russia is concerned. And that was 8 years after the war actually began in 2014. Vladimir Putin has said, for the duration since the beginning, denazification of Ukraine, Ukraine can't join NATO, Crimea is independent, or Crimea is Russia, and all of these other areas are independent republics. And he may make them, again, independent republics. It's awfully weird to think that this war has raged on for 3 years only to create the situation that existed before the war started. And how could there possibly be negotiations if that's what's happening? So what does it mean that the comedic actor who was installed as president and got rid of elections in Ukraine wants to keep the war going? And the only net effect of that is not that Russia's going to lose territory or that the United States is going to lose leverage or anything like that. It's only that the globalists are getting torn apart. If you are going to have a very complicated high-level operation to expose the establishment of both parties, expose the global regime and its agenda, expose how we've been lied to about all of history, I could not see it ever possibly going better than it has through all of these means. And so when people are like, when people think I'm not optimistic, totally optimistic. It's amazing what we're witnessing. And it's amazing the awakening. Just doesn't mean the threat is over. The threat still exists. The threat is still pervasive in our culture. The threat still occupies the critical cultural spaces. And I don't even know how anyone could deny that. I mean, a lot of progress has been made, and that's wonderful. But we don't have to be so committed to cheerleading that we blind ourselves to the potential for backsliding. Once people get comfortable, they're like, oh, we've won. And a lot of people have been like that. And then you just go back to whatever life you thought you had before, but now it's okay because Donald Trump's going to fix everything, even though Donald Trump can't fix everything. Fixes have to come at the local level. They have to come at the state level. Our elections are still garbage. And I think that this stuff's going to get settled over the course of the next 2 months. Actually, I hope we're going to have some pretty big revelations on that. And I think there's some indication that that's coming. But these things are ultimately going to have to be fixed by the people through understanding. And you don't develop the proper understanding by just playing the match game online. Oh, look, this thing on the internet from 8 years ago matches this story that I just read today. Evergreen, wow. The public's not going to understand how to participate in a government of, by, and for the people. They're not going to understand the necessity of their own roles by playing match online and cheerleading, clapping every time a new television character announces something we knew 5 years ago. I mean, you know, have your fun if you want. If that's fun and like you just like being amazed by how much the match game works, when you're willing to match anything to anything else for any reason. I guess it's entertainment. Let's continue. We'll probably wrap on Russia today. I had a whole other segment on Pete Hegseth and Steve Bannon and then Ron DeSantis. Then I was going to talk about the State Department reorganization, but maybe we'll do some of that on Friday. So a couple more on Russia here, and then we will wrap it up. Trump administration unwinds efforts to investigate Russian war crimes, so saith the Washington Post. This is from yesterday in the morning. The Trump administration has been engaged in a concerted effort to undo initiatives aimed at holding Russia and its leaders and allies accountable for alleged war crimes in Ukraine. Since taking office, the administration has moved to withdraw from an international group led by the European Union that was created to punish Moscow for violating international law in its invasion of Ukraine. The White House has also reduced the work of the Justice Department's War Crimes Accountability Team and dismantled a program to seize assets of sanctioned Russian oligarchs. And in a previously unreported move, it has vacated a coordinator position mandated by law. They made a law that says the president has to allow this position to operate under the executive branch, to gather intelligence from across the government on Russian atrocities committed in Ukraine, according to two people familiar with the matter who, like others interviewed for this story, spoke on the condition of anonymity because of the matter's sensitivity. That position was created by legislation co-written by Representative Jason Crow and former Congressman Michael Waltz, who is now Trump's national security advisor. And Crow, at least, is very upset. Now, darn it, I thought that I had highlighted another portion of this, or highlighted a portion, and that went away. Give me just 1 second to consult the machine. So here we are. I'm just going to go from my captions posted on Telegram. The administration has also terminated initiatives to counter malign activities directed by Moscow, such as a Justice Department task force that seized assets of Russian oligarchs and that enforced export restrictions to Russia. Litigation in those seizures continues, but no new seizures have been announced. The department has continued to enforce the export restrictions despite the task force's disbandment, an official said. And the administration killed the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force, which combated secret influence campaigns by Russia and other adversaries to sow discord in American politics. Skipping down once again. We had a whole machinery that was supporting Ukraine on multiple fronts, on the battlefield, in the international courts, and on the humanitarian side, said Beth Van Schaak, who led the Office of Global Criminal Justice until she retired on January 20th. It feels like a real reversal now, an upside-down world. Oh, no. So you're saying that the terrible thing you were doing has been reversed, and now this is the terrible world? We are supposed to believe that this is the terrible world? Not your whole thing. We had a whole machinery that was supporting Ukraine on multiple fronts, on the battlefield, in the international courts, and on the humanitarian side. That's kind of a shocking admission. This was all part of the bureaucracy and working with the European Union, and they had a whole machinery to support on the battlefield, in the international courts, and on the humanitarian side. Wow. So just flooding money, implementing the agenda, using the international governance system and the international courts to go after the people who oppose them. And then they were all doing all this on the justification that Russia had committed atrocities. And of course, it was them defining the atrocities and reporting on the atrocities. The ODNI coordinator was the backbone of the accountability effort, synchronizing intelligence agencies to collect information focused on different aspects of Russian atrocities. She said she is now a distinguished fellow at Stanford. Without the coordinator, no one is navigating the ship, she said. Jonathan White served as that coordinator until March. According to his LinkedIn page, he had worked at the State Department and National Security Council before taking up the position. According to the page, he did not respond to attempts to reach him. Pretty incredible, is it not? And let's leave off on this one for today. Let's go to Ben Shapiro on X, formerly Twitter. I traveled to Ukraine to interview President Zelensky. Part 1 of our conversation drops tomorrow on the Ben Shapiro Show. Here is the very well-produced promo. And what a backdrop they've got.
All working? Yes?
Yes, all good.
Action.
I want to start by asking you about the meeting that you had in the Oval Office. How do you feel that you could have handled things better with the president and vice president?
The meeting in the Oval Office, it did not help Ukraine.
You spent nearly $200 billion to the defense of Ukraine. There are lots of questions about where the money is going.
There's nothing to hide. We're absolutely open.
Would an audit be possible by the United States of where those dollars are going?
We are kind of the living shield against Russia's invasion to the civilized world.
I want to get to Russia's intentions and the possibilities of a ceasefire. Americans have questions about things that are happening here.
So, Ben Shapiro is asking all the important questions. He did not ask those important questions 2 and 3 years ago, but now he's going to do it. In that very well-produced little trailer for what I'm sure is a very well-produced interview. And you got to love the closing of the hands as though it was, it's been too long since I've been in the, around entertainment people. I cannot remember what the thing is called before they start the scene. And someone said action. I mean, Zelensky's a comedic actor. Maybe Ben Shapiro's an actor as well. Regardless, we have one of the chief neocons in the United States of America over there interviewing Volodomyr Zelensky, pretending to take a hard line. Ben Shapiro happens to be, as we said earlier, Jordan Peterson's colleague / employer at the Daily Weimar. And no matter how much Ben Shapiro aligns with Mark Levin and Ron Coleman and Jordan Peterson and James Lindsay and Pablo in his hatred for MAGA and his Trump derangement that has lasted for many years, we are still the psychopaths. These people have been wrong about everything for a decade straight, intentionally, as part of an agenda. And we're the psychopaths. Look at the agenda they support. But I guess we're the psychopaths. All right. I'm going to check the chat, and then I'm going to get the heck out of here. And I hope you guys all had a good time back in there. I don't believe that there are any Substack comments or questions. And so with that, I will be back on Friday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes! I can't stand to see him in all this pain! You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you! Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in! For the love of God, let the boy move in with you! Good Lord!
And
I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.